So I remember sitting at my desk at 2 in the morning with two spreadsheets side by side, trying to work out how I get the new documents out to the employment team to review them in time for us to deliver on the report. And so that memory just stayed with me of how broken it is when you're trying to effectively herd cats to complete this process. So building a playbook for what good looks like when you're rolling out technology in law firms, which is, I think, a very undervalued talent in a world where people are looking at the underlying technology. It's as much about what you do with the people and the process as it is with the underlying tech.
Welcome to the DevReady podcast. Joining me on the DevReady podcast today, I have Justin Hansky. Justin, thanks for taking the time out of your day. I know it's a late evening for you.
No stress. Good to be here.
For those of you that are new to the podcast or don't know how I do this, I've never actually met Justin before. This is the first time we're actually having a conversation. And because of that, I will let him introduce himself because there's no way I can do a good job at that. Justin, take it away.
No problem. So nice to meet you. Hi, Justin, founder of Diligence. So I started my life as a lawyer at a firm here in Australia called Arnold Bloch Liebler, where I did the kind of law just called M&A, stands for mergers and acquisitions. It's where you buy and sell businesses. And so I did that for about 4.5 years, moved to the UK, did an MBA and found my way into legal tech at the time, which was a very sleepy corner of the world, I think unlike how it is now, and worked for a company over there called Brighter, where I helped very large law firms find good things to do with technology, implement it, build solutions, roll it out and iterate on it. So I say that I did a product management apprenticeship there because I helped our large customers like Linklaters and Ashurst ship dozens of products over the course of the time there where I worked with them. And in addition to that, ran the customer success team there globally, focused on law firms. So building a playbook for what good looks like when you're rolling out technology in law firms, which is, I think, a very undervalued talent in a world where people are looking at the underlying technology. It's as much about what you do with the people and the process as it is with the underlying tech. So I then started the Australian office for that company and then left there and founded Diligence. I've had sort of the experience, therefore, of sitting on both sides of that world, on the technology side as well as the legal practice side, and bringing those two things together for what we do at the moment is absolutely perfect because we help M&A lawyers, the exact kind of lawyer that I used to be, get through thousands of documents in a much shorter time using AI and basically getting deals done faster with less risk.
And having that experience is probably what sets you apart from a few of the other people, is because if you've been on the other side of the fence as a lawyer, having to go through that and in the trenches of it, you understand the pain, you understand the problems. You're not trying to just source secondhand information.
100%. There's so much nuance in the way the process that we help with, which is called legal due diligence, which is basically the exercise. Maybe I should just set the scene for everyone here. When you go to buy a business, they will put every document that's relevant to the business into what's called a virtual data room. It's basically a super secure Google Drive. There might be hundreds, thousands of documents in there. And so the lawyers who are working on the transaction, they're advising the client, they get dumped this enormous amount of data. They have to arrange a team of, 5 to 20 people with different expertise to look through the parts of the data room that matter to them, and then bring a list of 20 things to the client that they actually have to deal with before they hand over a $100 million check to buy the business. So that process is called due diligence. It sounds simple, but there's a lot of gnarly sub-processes that sit within it. Until you solve all of them, you can't fix the overall pain of having to go from pile of documents to beautifully formatted 100-page client report.
Yeah. And simple is probably the nice way to put it, because just having to deal with that man and documents and actually taking that information, that I can imagine there's large teams that were doing this in the past. You got a lot of associates probably coming in and helping, doing a lot of the groundwork. And that's probably where the biggest shift has happened with what you're doing at Diligence and probably with what AI is bringing into the legal space, I imagine.
100%. So when this process used to be done sort of back in, the 90s and 2000s, you would have what's called a data room, which is a physical data room at that time where people would go and take boxes and boxes of documents related to the company, lock them in a boardroom, and then everyone would go in and spend 16 hours a day looking through every document in every box to try and find out what they needed to know. So it's very much a needle in a haystack exercise. So today that exercise is really the same, but the haystack's gone digital. So that's the main change. So, there are these virtual data rooms out there. The most well-known one in Australia is called Ansarada. They're sort of purpose-built for deals. And so really just helping people navigate that is what we do.
So how have you found the shift? I'm not sure what your timeline is with Diligence and when you're bringing those other products to market. Was the ChatGPT birth had that had occurred, I'll call it that, at the end of 2022 for you, or were you there before that?
So we actually decided in mid 2022 to start this company. And we started sort of doing very early customer development interviews and working on it. And our hypothesis was that actually the project management of a due diligence was completely broken. So, I used to sit in this seat myself. By the time you hit to like a mid-level lawyer, your job becomes not just reviewing every single document, which tends to be more the junior level grunt work, but your job is to coordinate a big team of people. I used to project manage people out of the classic lawyer project management stack of Excel, Outlook, and Word, which is obviously a complete disaster. But no one realizes, right? Like the thing about law firms is that we've always done it this way is basically the standard operating
The most
procedure.
dangerous sentence you can
Yeah,
use in the business.
100%. But that's right. Like you come in, you know nothing, and people are like, well, we're doing a due diligence. This is how it's done. Here's your spreadsheet. You're going to tell people what they need to do by using this spreadsheet. And then 2 days later, because the data room starts with 100 docs, then 500, then 1,000, your spreadsheet's out of date. And the thing about lawyers is they're not good with Excel. I would have considered myself, I did a finance degree at uni. I would have considered myself quite good with Excel, but I couldn't manage that process. So I remember sitting at my desk at 2 in the morning with two spreadsheets side by side, trying to work out how I get the new documents out to the employment team to review them in time for us to deliver on the report. And so that memory just stayed with me of how broken it is when you're trying to effectively herd cats to complete this process. And so when we started, we're like, okay, it's going to be the Jira for this process. So we're going to build a dedicated project management platform that just helps people run this better. And then, 3, 4 months later, we had that moment, right? And everything changed. And I'm not going to say everything changed straight away. I think what was obvious is that historically, there was this technology used to review contracts, which is called like machine learning classifier models. What it basically is you show it 100 examples of something, and then you show it a contract, and you're like, hey, go find the 101st example of the thing that I've just showed you 100 times. And the thing about that is it was kind of accurate, but it actually didn't speed you up that much because it didn't really help you with the legal work. It just kind of pointed you to the right place in a contract a little bit quicker. So people have been like slaving away at that technology for 10 years. There were some decent companies built off the back of it, but ultimately it just didn't solve enough of the problems. And so what became clear at the ChatGPT moment was things were changing. And we were going to be the people to help that, right? Like I would even say that until probably about 6 months ago, the underlying technology wasn't good enough to be considered at the level of a junior first, second year lawyer. Whereas now we've sort of hit that inflection point where now the quality of what's coming back from these systems is better than these grads who don't know what they're doing, and even better than a first or second year lawyer who kind of know what they're doing in producing high quality results. And I think that's the really big difference. So, the ChatGPT moment was sort of the shot across the bow, but what we're seeing now with this acceleration and capabilities is really the thing that's going to fix this problem.
And I agree with you there with the, say, ChatGPT 3 on that launch. It was something special that came out, but it didn't have all the capabilities that it does now. I don't think people realize how much has actually changed since the launch of that to where we are today. Like, everyone was complaining about hallucinations nonstop every time you spoke to it back then. And the amount of information you could put into it, what the context length, for those who don't realize, is like how much information you can give it before it overflows, was quite small. It was only 4,000 tokens, if anyone knows what that's like, 3 to 4 characters of a sentence, of a word. At the moment, you can get up to 1 million tokens in the context length. And that's like, I don't even know how many books that is off the top of my head, but it's a shitload of books. But yeah, having that early ability to then say, all right, here's a document, you'd probably struggle with the documents you could put into it at that early stage because it didn't have enough size to do it. So you have to break things up, chunk them, and then you have to summarize each page and then summarize the summaries of the pages. And then you probably lose information as you go. And I think that's probably the biggest problem you would have had back then, which is what we had looking at it at a software side as well.
100%. So, I mean, you're describing there what was the critical problem to solve back when you're working with something like GPT 4.0, which I often say was a kind of model that just sort of ran off vibes, right? Like you could put the same thing in 20 times and you'd get 20 like very different quality responses coming back. And so what you would end up doing is building, firstly, there's a couple of problems to solve. The first is what you described, which is just like the context of a contract is too long, right? Some contracts run to a couple hundred pages. If you're trying to put 200 pages worth of content in and expecting any kind of reliability out with those old models, you're absolutely dreaming. With the new models, you still have this degradation that happens as you fill the context window. So you sort of talked about 1 million tokens as the context window. it's not like, even though you can put a million tokens worth of stuff in there, performance will degrade really quickly once you get over sort of like 10,000 tokens. It's improving a lot constantly, which is great. And you talk about how much is that. My understanding is that around 1,500 pages can fit into a million tokens, but the standard data room that we see has over 2,500 documents. So forget pages, like we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of pages worth of content. And so you can't just process that by chucking it all into an LLM and praying that something good comes back. You have to build a system behind it to go and find the exact thing that you need and then advise on that. So you sort of touched on it before, you touched on the chunking, etc. It's sometimes known as a RAG system, is sort of the old way of doing things, right? Which basically stands for just go find the stuff that you need so that you give the LLM the smallest complete set of information to produce really good analysis. That was the big problem that we had to solve sort of when we started. That's become less of a problem as the models have gotten better. You still get better results for sure, but then your problems become different, which is that these models are not trained on legal text.
I thought they were trained on legal text, on anything public.
They are trained on anything public, but that's just like a small part of its training diet, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, so one of the big things that,
It's not proprietary.
yeah, maybe I should clarify. One of the big things that helps you get really good results is having a really good embedding model. And the embedding models are trained on lots of different things. So a good example is, for example, the letter V followed by a full stop. Depending on context, that could mean lots of different things, right? It could mean a case like the Crown against Joe Smith, right? In that case, it says, the Crown V dot Joe Smith. It could also mean victim if you're looking at a police report. V dot might mean victim. It could also mean the Roman numeral 5. And so you end up with the models getting confused because it's like, well, what does this even mean? And if you use something like a legal specific embedding model, you can solve that problem because it knows more than likely the V dot is talking about a case name. And so therefore this is just one example of the problems that you run into, right? Like when you feed the training diet is like all of the text ever written, it's great up to a point. It's great up to a point, right?
It still needs to understand, because as soon as you say V dot to me, it's a version number.
Yeah, well, there you go. Exactly. Yeah. So there you go. It's a fourth example that I wasn't aware of. But I think that's exactly the point, right? And that's why all of these lawyers keep getting in trouble for having hallucinated citations. So I don't know if you probably haven't looked in the detail, right? But probably every now and then you'll see in the newspaper, like some lawyer submitted a whole bunch of hallucinated cases from ChatGPT into court filings.
Yeah, I've been using them as examples through the podcast.
Exactly. And the reason why this stuff gets picked up is at the end of every case, there's something called a citation. It's kind of like, you can think of it like a barcode, right? It sort of talks about the year. It's got some random little numbers and letters and codes. It's like nonsense language. And so when LLMs are producing the average of what they're expecting, they will produce something that looks like a citation. But if you go to try and look it up in the law library, you'll never find it.
Yep.
And so that's why people are ending up getting in trouble. And so that's why they're the kinds of legal specific problems you need to solve in order to produce really reliable results.
I'd say that's also, it's a problem with the LLMs in your domain where it has to be truthful 100% of the time and not have hallucinations. But it's also a failure in the people that are using the systems not reviewing everything properly. Because if you get rid of the grunt work, you should be able to spend more time reviewing, which is what our job is now shifting to. We don't have to create the spec from scratch every time. I can get a draft, then I can now quickly, I'm days ahead of where I would have been, and I can quickly review and put in the missing context, which is what those lawyers should have done, or the juniors should have picked up and done that cross-check against the references.
100%. So, I mean, that's the other way to think about this. In a world where the output of a system might even be 95% accurate, which most of us would consider to be a pretty good level of accuracy, if you're a law firm who are being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a mission critical report about a company that someone's about to buy, 95% is not the threshold. It's actually closer to 100. So, no human system is perfect, right? Like I described, there are a lot of junior lawyers involved in this process who will read a document and not pick up on the thing that should really have been found because they just don't understand the industry, the law. They don't have that rounded knowledge yet.
And have experience.
But in that case, so if 95% is not good enough, well, then you have to accelerate the humans in the loop. You can't try and replace them wholesale. You have to make sure that they can get through their work as quickly as possible. And exactly what you say, it's all about checking the quality of what comes back. It's about making it super easy to interrogate the source material, having a beautiful UI where everything is meticulously referenced and it'll show you where we've highlighted in the document the thing that we're telling you about. And it's about making sure that you can get through that work faster.
And that's where I think the biggest benefit to the AI is. It's helping you get through work faster. And in my mind, it's the way I've been explaining it over the years is it gets you past the blank page syndrome. A lot of people have trouble starting something. So if you can get something on the page that's a draft, even if it's very wrong, you can quickly correct it and do your changes to it because you can change it easier than you can create it.
100%.
The way I've experienced it. And so we've got our own AI platform called DevReady AI, which helps you write product spec for software. Goes through requirements, gives you a brief, the user stories, acceptance criteria, task estimations, and it gives you that. We have a very low threshold for truthfulness. It's an ideation platform. So I'm happy to see hallucinations come in because you might suggest a feature that I haven't thought of. So in that scenario, that's a wanted feature. So I haven't tried to tell it to do not make up stuff because that's an ideal scenario for me. Now that could be the one unique thing that ties something together that we haven't thought of, or you give me an idea to think of something else and spawned another idea.
100%. I was going to say devs are really senior devs are really good at this because they're used to doing code review, which is basically checking someone else's work to make sure that it's excellent, that it's going to function correctly, that it's to spec. And senior lawyers are really good at this too because they spend their life correcting the work of junior lawyers because every single word that ends up in a diligence report goes through, 3, 4, 5 pairs of hands before it's considered kosher enough to send to the client. So they have this skill already of being able to sense check the work of something that's more junior or more or less reliable. And I think what's also lost a little bit in this, you sort of touched on the inaccuracy being a feature, not a bug for your system. Mm-hmm. I think people lose sight of the fact that although these systems are subhuman in terms of quality at some tasks, so the best lawyer will be better than the system at whatever it's trying to do, whether that's reviewing a contract, etc. There are tasks where the AI is superhuman. Right. So a lot of the risks in a diligence might be found in an enormous spreadsheet listing, hundreds of trademark registrations across 50 jurisdictions. It's not possible for a human to review that with the level of detail that a system can. And it might pick up there's a missed filing date for the Japanese trademark buried in row 703 of this spreadsheet. A human's not going to catch that, but our system can because the AI never gets tired. Its attention never strays. And so even though some stuff is subhuman, some stuff is definitely superhuman.
I think that there where you said the attention strays is probably the biggest problem with the type of work that we're shifting to now with AI. Because the way I see it, the code reviews, that's the boring part of the job. No one likes to do that, but it's forced. I'm sure lawyers don't like having to just read and make sure that everything's being done properly. I'm assuming it's a similar type of thing. But the code reviews is the boring part of the work, is just checking that someone's done the right thing. But your attention does drop after a while. You put a lot of focus initially, but then depending on how big that task is, you may get through, in your example, 50 lines and go, yep, then 100%. Then you start lightly skimming and then even more lightly skimming as you go down. And that's the challenge in moving to what I'm calling that boring work.
Yeah, 100%. It's hard to pay attention. And I mean, there's definitely an element of the systems being, convincingly, wrong. Because LLMs are super willing to give you an answer. You set it a task, they will complete it. What the accuracy is when they do, right? They'll at least give it a red hot go.
It's a confident wrong answer.
Exactly. And so that can be even harder to find, especially if you're more junior and you lack that judgment. And so that's what's changing about the work that's being done at the more junior level is they're having to get up the learning curve much faster in order to start adding their strategic insight, really bringing their intelligence not to that grunt work, but being able to critically think and review what's coming back from a sophisticated system.
Do you find that rhetoric that's in the market is a challenge then for the junior developers, or junior lawyers and developers will be the same, to get enough experience when they're not going through that grunt work anymore? They're not in the trenches doing what the senior lawyers did more than 5 years ago, I would say. Because all the people prior to ChatGPT came out, you had to do that grunt work. You had to go through the files in the boardroom and be there all day and all night.
I think it's really tricky to know at the moment. And I think we're going to see over the next few years exactly how this plays out. To some extent, I think there is truth in getting the reps in definitely helps you create judgment and expertise. So it's the struggle of learning that helps you get to the sort of the expert level. And so, they did some early studies, of how performance improved over time when you got access to ChatGPT. So there was a study, I think it was among Kenyan entrepreneurs, and they gave them access to ChatGPT to help them run their business. And what they found was the really inexperienced ones didn't have particularly improved performance because they didn't yet know what good looked like. Whereas very experienced entrepreneurs were able to level up much faster. And so I guess the question is, how do we build those reps much quicker? I personally think that you can build them by doing more strategic work, right? Like, there's so much boring time in a 3-hour review of a contract that you probably have like 4 or 5 minutes of like genuine, my brain is switched on, this matters, this is tricky, this is this interpretation. And then for the balance of the time, I'm just like, yeah, that seems fine, that seems fine, that seems fine.
Yeah, you're just cursory looking at it.
I think there's the ability to accelerate and concentrate learning. And so how those two things end up balancing out, like, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone does, because that's the biggest problem with what, like the fear or the bullishness on that like jobs market's going to be is how much of that is going to be affected by how much people get to learn, and then what the juniors don't get to do, and then if there's no junior developers, there's no senior people in the future.
100%. And like I think it's a genuine problem that we're about to face, right? Like, because to some extent, law firms have always historically operated on a pyramid model. So basically, you end up with 10 grads in, and if you get one partner out, that's a great result. So, you've got all these people coming up through the system. And so attrition is almost a feature, not a bug, of the law firm model. And if you no longer need 10 coming in, well, either you have to get 100% better at choosing 5, or you have to find another way to solve this problem. Maybe you're pinching from other law firms who've paid the price of training the juniors, and you get to pick them at a higher level because you've got the clout, the brand, etc. I don't know what the answer is to that. I think, like every white collar service industry looking into the future, you saw the market crash basically after the Citrini research sort of fantasy paper, right?
Yeah.
I think there's so much uncertainty, it's really hard to predict.
Yeah, there's just so much noise as well about it. So I know a lot of there's certain law firms in America that just tanked a couple of weeks ago after Claude released their Claude work and their skills. And one of them was contract reading. And that did something to, I can't remember, some law firm in America, and it dropped by like 20%. But there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of exuberance about what's possible, and it's so early to tell, but I know it's not going to happen in the next 6 months. Like that short time frame that people are spouting, it's not going to happen. It can't work that fast. There is still hallucinations, there is still problems, it's still not 100%.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, look, if you go into a law firm, the law firm's accountable for what they put out. Someone's not going to go trust an AI and then say, oh, I'll go to court and go, oh, the AI did it. No, you're still accountable for that. And then they can pass that blame on to someone else. So I think that is still going to hold moving forward.
100%. And human lawyers have a legal monopoly on giving legal advice, right?
Yes.
So an AI system cannot, by definition, give legal advice. It's not registered. It hasn't had its admission moved in court, hasn't signed the role of the relevant local jurisdiction, which is basically some fancy book with every lawyer's name. Whoever was a lawyer gets to sign on the line and sort of prove that they were a lawyer. And so in that context, the human lawyer has to be the one who takes responsibility for the legal advice. And all law firms have policies that say this, but like this is going to come into contact with the fact that when clients can self-serve something that's like 90% as good as legal advice,
Yep.
well, what happens to the law firm giving legal advice at very expensive rates? So I think there's just like a very massive dislocation coming to this market. So if we look at the problem we're solving, there's no way in 3 years' time that you're still throwing a group of 20 lawyers at this problem, spending $500,000 over a month in order to review a few thousand documents. Like,
Yep.
it's just something's got to give. And so the question is, do you just have fewer very senior lawyers sitting over the top of it? Are clients going elsewhere to get effectively sort of that product paired together with some insurance that's effectively a substitute for legal advice in that situation, and then saving the really high value strategic stuff? I'm not really sure how it's going to break down, but all I know is, even if the market's overcooked its response to, the release of the Claude plugins, which are fine, it's a markdown file with some details around how you might go about reviewing a contract.
It's just a prompt.
People can freak out of, yeah, exactly. It's a nice prompt that's been tested by the Anthropic team. Like, that's cool, but like also at the same time, this is the worst these systems are ever going to be. And so
Yep.
this is changing whether you like it or not. And so law firms, people who use law firms, they're going to have to get on the train or get left behind.
I've been saying this is the worst the system's ever going to be for the past 3 4 years. Every second day, like it's hard to get that across to people who don't use it. You and I are very heavily in this space. A lot of people still aren't. A lot of people have used ChatGPT. Oh, it didn't work, and then they don't go back to it. But when you're in the space, you can see what's coming. You've seen the improvements and the changes that happen over time. And that probably leads to where you said the people are self-servicing. Have you seen that in discussions through the industry where people are saying now, or lawyers are saying, the client's come up to me and he's got half a brief written or whatever it may be, and it's like, now I have to dissect it or understand it or scrap it?
I mean, probably the place to start would just be with the pace of change and the quality of what's coming out of these AI systems. So you and I know how much they're improving, right? We've had some amazing new joiners come onto the company this year. I did a presentation in January about the state of AI in legal. And I gave that same presentation last week, so nearly 6 weeks later. And there are chunks of it that are already out of date because things are moving so fast and the quality is so good. So there were, I think, a lot of complaints early last year that clients were coming with stuff that was coming out of these systems that was so far off base that lawyers were having to do 2 times the work. They were having to do the correct work and then spend the other half of the time explaining why the results that the client brought to them are complete nonsense and that they've wasted their time. And so some firms will be like, if you bring me ChatGPT's work, I will charge you more. This is anecdotal, right? Like, I don't know how many people actually did this. Sometimes what you see on LinkedIn maybe isn't reality, but there was lots of talk around these things happening. So I mean, we're already seeing it now with our customers. So we work with some private equity funds, so they're serial acquirers of businesses. Their job is to run acquisition processes really efficiently. And when it comes down to it, and they're actually going to go buy a business and they're going to put the check down, they will pay a law firm to get it right because they want the insurance. But they also spend a lot of time looking at businesses that they're on the fence about buying, and they don't want to incur those legal costs. And if we can give them something that gets them 90% of the way there before they decide whether or not to engage the lawyers, that's hugely valuable. And the other thing that they can do is they can have a much more sophisticated conversation with their lawyers when it comes time to instructing them. They can say, look, we're across these specific details. We think, this is a very intellectual property heavy business in the tech space. We need to spend a lot of time looking at their patents. And so they're armed with this information heading into it, which means they'll get better service. They'll get answers to their most important questions faster. So in a way, it's empowering them. And as long as the quality of what we're doing is extremely high, which we do by baking big law knowledge in, right? Like, our systems are trained by people who worked at the top law firms across Australia, the UK, and the US. That knowledge going into the system means the quality of what's coming out is extremely high. And it's really empowering people who are not sophisticated users of legal services. So, we have one PE fund customer. We spoke to them about what it's like for them to read a really important lease in a deal that they're trying to do. And they're like, I will sit there and struggle with this thing for 6 to 8 hours because I don't understand property law. And so when I'm reading this, it's like, trying to read it in Greek, for instance, right? Like they just don't know what they're looking at. And so now we can give them a review of it within minutes that's at an extremely high quality, in plain English, trained by big law lawyers. And they're empowered to say, okay, that doesn't look good that someone could walk away from this deal for no reason on 30 days notice. I'm going to ask my lawyer to double check that. And so it really focuses the review as well.
It points out the really obvious things probably without context. And then it does cut out a lot of the simple work almost, because now the lawyer doesn't have to spend time doing that. In our space, in the software development, I think it's a little bit different, because now with ChatGPT, you can say, oh, everyone can be a lawyer almost, but with what's happening in the development space, is that's like the primary use case that's taken off in all of the leading LLM companies is development. And then you've got Replit and Lovable and all these other things that are helping people write code. Everyone can be a developer now. You've got an idea, you can build something. But a lot of the people don't know how to instruct it to build the right thing. They haven't been taught how to think in like data structures and how to model things correctly. There's no security. They don't know if what's coming out is good. They just see it function. And then you get to the point where we're working with a lot of people who are doing vibe coding systems, and it gets to the point where I told this thing 40 times and it wouldn't fix the issue, and they created other bugs. Then you look at the code and like every attempt is still in the code, and it just becomes very hard to maintain. Or they've built something and they're like, yep, I did this and then I changed and I changed and I changed and I changed, but 6 versions of the app are still in the one app, and it's very hard to dissect and put it together. So there's a lot of knowledge that, as you mentioned, like you need to know what you're looking for. and how to instruct the right things. Not even instruct, just understand how to approach the problem, which is the benefit you're bringing by baking in that expert domain knowledge into the product.
The key thing is making sure that you're extremely structured in the way you work through it, right? Like, so what you just described reminds me of what we learned when I worked for my previous company, which was a no-code app builder. So basically, we gave you a bunch of Lego blocks, you could stitch them all together, and you could ask some questions and then automate a document out the back end. And so they're really great for low and medium complexity use cases. But as soon as it gets into something that's even a little bit more than medium, you want to start using code, because your ability to work in a really custom way will make a huge difference to your ability to build on top of it later to solve difficult problems. And I think we're seeing the same thing now with vibe coding, where if you're doing something that's like low or medium complexity, if you just need a marketing website that looks beautiful, and the mouse turns a different color when you hover over something, right? Like, that's awesome. That's core functionality. If you need to build a complicated application with a lot of embedded business logic, really high levels of, security, hosting, etc., it just becomes really tricky. And, it's all about the way that you have very senior people who know what good looks like, instructing it to go through all of the different steps that they take to create it, that lets you get something excellent and scalable at the end. And so it's exactly the same with our systems.
I would say probably the best equivalent I've probably thought of just now over the years is it's like buying an IKEA cabinet or a wardrobe or getting a one custom built. Just because you can buy the IKEA cabinet, put it in place, and put it together doesn't mean you're a cabinet maker who can build something custom that fits the space better. Like, you may have a meter gap and the cabinet from IKEA only comes in 900 wide. That's what's going to go in that box. It's not going to fit perfectly, but it'll do part of the job for you. And I think that's probably the best way to explain what people are doing with apps. It's not going to be the best product. It's going to be falling apart in certain ways, but you think you've got it doing the right thing. And once you get it to market, now you can have all these other problems you didn't even know about.
100%. But I mean, the exciting thing for us is our very experienced developers get huge leverage out of this technology, because they know what great looks like. So they're able to move at pace in a way that they were never able to do before. They're able to solve much more complex problems over a longer period of time, right? Like, because the AI can run over a longer period of time than they were able to. And, we have great developers who are looking at these systems even late last year and were saying, it's still not there. And now that attitude has changed because it's just moved that fast. It's, I sometimes hear the term AI vertigo that's applied to what's going on in our space, because it feels like every few months there's this change that makes you sit up and go like, whoa, what just happened? And it feels like we just had one of those.
It's very shocking with how fast things move. So Opus 4.5 was probably the big one in the coding space, which was October, November last year, and then 4.6 in the start of January. Like, that wasn't even a big gap between the two to then go from one to the other. And 4.6 is, again, huge difference on 4.5. But again, like, I can now spend, as a developer, a lot more time thinking about what I want to build, instructing the right way, reviewing a plan, and then getting it built, rather than spending then the next 30, 40, 50, 60 hours of actually implementing that plan. I can test it and review it. So the writing the code was never the hard part.
Yeah.
Like, reading a document isn't the hard part. The hard part is understanding the context of what you're reading, how it applies to the situation, and then how do you advise moving forward. And that's the same. Like, the plan is more important than the document. And we're a very document planning heavy business in our organization. And we plan systems before we build them, because it's easier to change a plan than it is to change the code. It's a much quicker way to iterate. And if you think through the problems up front, then you don't get as many problems as you're building.
100%. And that's part of the analogy around what we do, which is, sure, we can throw thousands of documents into our system and run it and pull back red flags. But actually, if we take the time to prepare and plan up front, we find out about the business we're looking at, the sector it's operating, all of those intricate details, it massively increases the quality of what comes out the other end. So let me give you a simple example that I think people will be able to follow. The same clause in the lease might be very, very different depending on the context of the business you're looking at. If you're looking at a tech business with 3 people in a co-working space here in Australia, if they're in an office and there's 3 of them sitting there in that co-working space, if you can end that lease on 20 days, that's fine. Whatever. They'll go to the next co-working space and they'll start it up. Not an issue at all. If you've got a lease that can be ended on 20 days and you've just sunk $20 million into this advanced manufacturing facility, then you got a really big problem, right? Same clause, completely different context that changes exactly how you think about it. And that's just like one tiny example. This thing's being replicated, thousands of times. And so being able to get that information out of the user up front, knowing what that information is, and then allowing the system to start to plan for how it's going to review given that context makes an enormous difference in the quality of what comes out the other end.
And I think that approach is probably universal to anyone using AI or LLMs in any application, in any domain. It's plan, think about what you're trying to do up front. It's not just it's a one sentence and then you work off it, unless that's the approach you want, which is just give me a quick draft and then we'll iterate from there. But again, that's you in a different way of planning. It's not, give me an NDA and then hand it over to someone.
Exactly. And I mean, we've taken a lot of the heavy lifting out of the planning, right? Like we just ask our users to provide a few documents about the deal, to provide the most relevant information that we know is going to move the needle most of the way. And then we filled all of our knowledge into the back. So it just reduces by probably about 10 times the amount of pre-context that the people who are using our system need to give it in order to get really high quality results.
Yeah. And that's what makes a difference between a LLM wrapper and a business that utilizes the LLMs or the AI in the right way to deliver a process and a workflow. Because ChatGPT is never going to build that workflow and put the domain in. They're the general tool. Same as Anthropic. They're there to handle anything and everything for everyone. They're not going to make specific workflows, specific tools for people.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think there's a lot of excitement at the moment about sort of the agentic capabilities of these systems to go away and run and decide how they're going to do it. But they'll also decide to run everything a slightly different way every time. And I sometimes refer to people thinking about this for our processes like vibe diligence. And vibe diligence isn't going to be good enough to satisfy your client and the person who's providing insurance for the transaction that the work has been done consistently to a high enough standard in order for them to give it the tick of approval and move on. And so I'm a little skeptical, at least in the near term, of that being a solution to this problem.
Yeah, because then again, being agentic is it will decide how it operates and executes a workflow every single time. Even if you tell it how to do it, it still has the ability to come up with its own steps and tasks because that's what an agent does. Otherwise, you're just going to a very prescriptive. Effectively, it's a chat model. I'm asking you to do this, you do this. Now with that result, you do this next step, and you're telling it one by one. You're not giving it the agency to do what it's doing. And we've seen that with the vibe-coded solutions where we've had a client bring a product to us, and to call an API, it was done 3 different ways. Now, that's just a pain to maintain and manage. And you have to try and migrate and standardize it, where if I was building it, I would say, this is how we do the one thing. Now, that's the plan moving forward for everything. And then use these other ones as examples. That's just a different way to approach it. But giving it the agency is always going to be, you're letting it do it. Same as working with any real developer or lawyer. Each one's going to do it their own way. But if you have a set process that everyone knows to follow, then you get a better result.
100%. And I think, diligence is one of those things that the 80-20 rule applies. So I can tell you in advance for this kind of business, when you go and look at it, what you're going to find out the other end. There's going to be a bunch of contracts with important people that could be walked away from at the end. There's probably some employees who you're calling contractors that aren't really contractors. They're probably employees, right? Like I can tell you what these are in advance. And so,
there's common things.
Exactly. And so law firms rely heavily on what's called precedent, where they have language that they use that the partners have negotiated between themselves is the correct way to describe these sorts of risks. And so we'll take that from them and we'll make sure that when it comes out the other end, it sounds like them, right? You're not getting 3 different descriptions of it in 3 different reports, kind of like your 3 different API calls. You're just getting, well, when we find this issue, this is how we describe it. It will come out consistently every time. And so we're able to really ensure there's a level of customization for individual law firms when they use our system too.
So what's next on the horizon for Diligence? We'll just dive into that before we wrap up.
Yeah. So for us, really, the Australia and New Zealand business is going really well. We're growing here. We're working with incredible firms, people like Main Weatherall, Hopgood Gannon, and now we're moving over to the UK. We've got our early customers over there in the UK and the US. So it's really about expanding into these markets where most of the world's deals are done. We need to be where that happens. And so that's why me and my co-founder are both moving over to London to start our office over there. And I think the other thing for us, we're not going to rest until we've completely solved the diligence problem. So from the moment you get or even start to request the documents you need in order to make a buying decision on a company until you produce that final beautifully formatted 100-page report, everything in the middle is us. And it's not just looking at the documents, it's all the gnarly processes around it. It's managing the team, it's getting expert sign off, it's managing the things that you need to request from the seller, everything in there. Until we solve that, we're not going to be resting.
And I wish you luck with that. And it sounds like you're going about things the right way, and you're actually delivering outcomes that are going to be useful to people.
100%. We like to be useful.
And that's what we all want. Well, Justin,
Exactly.
it's been a really insightful chat. Thank you for taking the time today. If anyone wants to find out more or learn more about Diligence, how can they do that?
Yep. Search on Google Diligence, Deligence, or www.deeligence.com. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you know any lawyers that might be interested, or anyone who works in deals generally, who works buying and selling companies. We're really open to having chats to people. Things are changing really fast, and we're happy to help them navigate that changing landscape.
And we'll add all that to the show notes, so you don't have to worry. You don't have to play that back, listeners, to get to the URL. But we'll add that to show notes. Once again, thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks.